DTR. Some of you will recognize what those letters stand for. If you're not sure, let me help you out. If you are a young man in a relationship with a young woman, then chances are these letters are enough to strike fear into your heart. You may run away from, postpone, you may dread the DTR talk. Some young men will even terminate a relationship if they feel like the DTR talk is imminent. It is that official talk that takes place in every romantic relationship. Do you know what it stands for, DTR? Define the relationship. You sit down and you decide where things are going. Have things moved from casual to committed? I remember this date I went on in high school. On the very first date, the girl tried to have the DTR talk with me. First date, DTR. I got out of there PDQ. I just ran away.
Well, good morning. So good to be back with you, and I'm only somewhat jet lagged. Had a few days to kind of get back on schedule, but we had a tremendous time in Israel and Egypt. How many of you have been really frustrated with COVID? Yeah. Well, COVID gave us a great gift. Tourism in Israel was down to less than 15% of normal. And so what that meant was that our group got to go to so many more sites than we would have had time to at other times. We got to spend more time at the places that we were visiting, and we were not nearly as rushed in a lot of those locations. And so it really was in Israel an intensely moving time in a whole variety of ways, and we'll be telling you those stories as time goes on, but there were some times where it was just incredible to me to realize that Jesus walked these same steps, that at some point he stood on the same stone floor where we were standing, and there were just multiple times that I know I was, and many others were just completely moved to tears by the realization that was a place where all of this stuff took place. I also was moved to realize that when you said that tourism was down to 15%, folks, sometimes did you ever feel alone as a believer? There are people all over the world, millions and millions and millions of us. And so be encouraged that there are so many more than what we see with our eyes in our culture who absolutely love Jesus, and we are part of something that is so much bigger than we are. I love the anthem. Where'd she go? She left. Okay. Broken and Spilled Out. One of the places that was intensely moving for me was we went to Caiaphas' house, where Jesus was tried, and what we saw at Caiaphas' house was the dungeon where Jesus was thrown, where he was kept before, where all the prisoners who went before Caiaphas, they were put down there before they would come up before him. And so I was kind of what they called a sweep. The whole group would go and do their thing, and then it was my job to make sure we didn't leave anybody behind, even though at times there were some, I didn't want to leave them behind. Okay. But what that meant was I couldn't get down in there where everybody was going through that, and so right at the end, then they all had gone up the stairs and stuff to get out of there, and so I went down and I had some time there by myself, and it was just, just a less than a minute, but it was absolutely so moving, to realize and be part of that. Well, here we are. We're starting Lent. Anniversaries are very important for us, and we have some friends that have their wedding anniversary as tattoos on their bodies so that they would never, have an excuse to forget, even though maybe he forgets to look at the tattoo, and so then he forgets the anniversary. But Lent is kind of one of those things. Lent is one of those rhythms of life. It's one of those times when those of us who are followers of Jesus, we think back and perhaps we spend more time in reflection and contemplation on just what these days mean. And my hope is that as a congregational family, that these days and this time that we spend in these weeks in this series, Not a Fan, that it will cause us to do more than just to remember, but perhaps take our next steps as followers of Jesus. Some time ago, I heard about a couple of kids who had a homemade lemonade stand. You've seen those, haven't you? They're beside the road, and they have a sign, lemonade for, 50 cents. And I've also noticed that there are people who are really good at making lemonade, and so they sell it. Instead of selling it for 50 cents, it's $5. It's freshly squeezed, and they take their trailers around to different fairs and things like that in the summer. And so I think that at some point, somebody who perhaps was one of those little kids with a roadside lemonade stand figured out that if they raised their price, if they began to build a business, that they could do this full time. That it would go from, instead of making a few bucks on top of their allowance, that, perhaps I could make a living doing this thing. So the kid then goes out and he goes from his roadside stand and instead of that, he hand paints a sign, lemonade 50 cents, and then he's successful on that day, and so he does it again and again, and he gets invited to a middle school baseball game, and so he sets up his lemonade stand, and he raises his price to $2 a glass, and things are going good, and he's getting more and more requests, and then finally he realizes that, he's got to figure out a way to make sure he has enough lemons to do this thing, and he gets into then spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff, and he's a lot busier than he thought he was ever going to be, and it's taken up a lot more time than he expected, and he has to keep track of all of his expenses, and he begins to realize that this thing is more than just a sideline, that it's becoming more of a commitment. At some point, he has to make a choice. Is this going to be a career? What am I going to do if I have to hire some employees? What am I going to do to get people to share this load? Maybe I should go into the lemon stand business. Carla and I, we have a friend who is a fantastic woodworker. He makes heirloom quality furniture. And he has made all the furniture in his family's home, and he has given away furniture to all of his friends. In fact, he asked Carla and I, he said, what can I make for you, for your home? And we already have so much stuff, we don't know what to do with it. Okay? But he decided, okay, I'm gonna make this piece of furniture, and he said, and then I'll just sell it. And he got to the end of making the piece of furniture, and he couldn't let go of it. In other words, he's come to the point where he says, okay, do I really want to do this just as a hobby, or is this something that I'm going to turn into a business? Some time ago, there was a movie called The Intern. And in this movie, the founder of the movie comes to a point and has to define what her relationship is going to be to her company. She had built it, she'd taken it to a point, but recognized that had come to the point of the question of whether they would hire a CEO or not. And she has to decide what the future of her company will look like. What will her relationship with that company become? By the way, as a sidelight, every senior citizen needs to watch that movie. If you haven't seen that movie as a senior citizen, you need to, okay? Commercial done. Now, each one of those questions is moving from one level of commitment to another. And you and I have looked at these questions in a whole variety of ways, and perhaps we haven't even recognized them as the question that they are. Should I stay in this job, or should I go with the other? Do we buy this house, or go for the other? Is this girl the one I should ask to marry? Is this the school that I should go to? You see, over the next several weeks, we're going to be examining our relationship with Jesus Christ. And we're going to ask ourselves that question. Define the relationship. What is our relationship with Jesus Christ? Now, I get it. Some of you are kind of on a first date with Jesus. You've heard about him, you kind of understand a little bit, and you want to know more. It's okay. Every relationship starts there. But for many of us, most of us in this room, perhaps need to come face to face with the reality of who is this Jesus to us and where is our relationship going? Long time ago, I had a professor in seminary, who told me that my job as a pastor was to comfort the discomforted and discomfort the comforted. Some of us in our church are too comfortable. Some of us have not faced the reality of who Jesus is to us. Some of us have just kind of been coasting along in neutral. This is the thing that we need to do. And sometimes I think we need to come to a point, and Lent is a wonderful time to do that, where we come face to face and say, hey, am I going to be serious about this thing of being a follower of Jesus, or am I just going to be lukewarm? Where am I with relationship? Now, one reason that this is absolutely essential, that you and I have to figure out where we are in our relationship with Jesus Christ, is what is going on in our culture right now. Have you noticed that? Our culture is anti-Christian. It is absolutely anti-Christian. And if you and I stand for who Jesus is, it's going to cause us to set apart. Now, many people in reality have just sort of been coasting for a long time. Church was just part of their routine. It's what people did on Sunday morning. We went to church and we did our thing, and it was kind of commonplace. Folks, that is no longer the case. Have you noticed that? It's no longer the case. We are an oddity. This is not what is common in our culture, to gather on Sunday morning or Saturday night or whenever to worship Jesus. In fact, in many circles, the church, Christians, believers like you who love Jesus, are seen as the problem in our society. School boards all across the United States are trying to throw Christians out and Christian ideals. It's essential that you and I know where we stand with Jesus, and we define it, because you see, in much of our culture, we are ostracized, we are excluded. Instead of being loved and accepted, we are vilified, or at best dismissed as out of touch or outdated, and some people actually see us as evil. And we are written off. You see, we live in a culture where what is right is now seen as wrong, and what is wrong is now seen as right. The world is turned upside down. For these reasons and many, many more, Christianity is under attack. And as long as we just stay in our corner and are quiet, for years and years, the world was okay with that, right? You remember those days. You didn't talk about two things, and what were they? Politics and religion. Those days are gone, people. They're gone. Even though we are quiet and in our corner, the world is attacking believers. And you and I have to come to grips with that. We have to recognize where our relationship is going to be. You see, the gloves have come off. And the things that Christianity stands, very often we are called the very things that Christians stand against. We are called hate mongers. We are called racists. And I could go on and on. And the result is cultural Christianity is disappearing and soon will be gone. What do I mean by cultural Christianity? Another way to put it is casual Christianity. Christianity that is just kind of going on as we have always gone on, and just kind of, you see, the reality is it will go away. Casual Christianity will go away because those who are casual in their relationship with Jesus will no longer be able to stand the heat in the kitchen, and they will disappear. And that's where some of you are right now. You're casual in your faith. Yeah, you know Jesus and you know the stories, but you know you're not serious. These weeks are about defining our relationship with Jesus. Here is his invitation Sometimes in our world, I think we have got this idea that Jesus is all about making us feel good about ourselves. And we have made ourselves the center of our faith, as if Jesus is here to serve us. Look what Luke 9:23 says. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. In a world that says it's all about me, Jesus clearly states that it is not about us. It is all about him. The faith of the Bible is not about what you and I can get. Or we don't follow Jesus just because he makes us feel good. It's about living so that Jesus will get glory for who he is. You see, many of us have to have that define the relationship talk. Now, some of you are ready to move to the next level. And all you're needing is in these days, as we preach and as we're in a small group, all you needed is some encouragement and just kind of a nice little nudge to keep you going, to move past the casual, past the convenient, into something more devoted, into something more committed. And that's wonderful. Now, some of you are not. And if you're not ready to take those next steps, I'll tell you right now, you are going to be uncomfortable these next weeks. Because that's where we are pushing us. That's where Jesus is calling us. He's calling us out of our casual, comfortable Christianity to something that is radical and completely, absolutely committed to him. To where Jesus is not just something in a corner of our life that we do on Sunday morning, but to where our faith in Jesus and our followership of him invades every day of our lives. To where Jesus is Jesus on Friday night at the party, in the same way Jesus is Jesus on Sunday morning in church. To where we are the same people. See, when I talk about that, it makes people, some of you, anxious. And some of you may be going into fight or flight mode. You just get ticked off, and I'll get your emails tomorrow or calls, and that's okay. And some of the rest of you just go away. But people, this is what it is. And this is what we're all about. So here is our question. Are you a fan or are you a follower of Jesus? Are you a fan or are you a follower of Jesus? Now, some people will say, well, aren't we all followers of Jesus? Well, I don't want you to jump too quickly. You may remember January where we talked about what really a follower of Jesus was. That a follower of Jesus was someone who was, yes, walking with Jesus, but was being transformed by Jesus and was serving with Jesus. That's what really defined a follower. Now, if we define the word fan as an enthusiastic admirer, you think that's a fair definition? A fan being an enthusiastic admirer. We've seen that. And many of us are sports fans, right? I mean, we love our teams. We watch the games. We cheer them on. We spend way too much for jerseys of our favorite players, right? Do you remember him? Absolutely the best football player to ever grace the earth. No. Not that good, but he's one of my favorites. Okay, we buy the jerseys. We it ties us into something like that. And our family loves sports, and we especially like baseball. And we used to go to all kinds of pirate baseball games. And this goes way back. We were fans before it was fashionable to be a pirate fan. Some of you remember when we lost for 20-some years in a row. We went to the games then. We just liked that. And we had part-time season packages, and it was kind of interesting as we watched. We were fans when the seats were empty. You'd buy a seat, and you'd come in, and you'd get to have your pick of everything in the section, wherever you wanted to sit. And it was kind of fun, and Shane was little, and so we could let him run all over the stadium because we could see him 100 yards away. There were so few people there. And we just loved baseball. And we were fans when the seats were empty, and then we were fans when they went through those few years, where they were winning again with Andrew McCutcheon and all that time. It was interesting how the seats filled up and then the seats emptied again, right? Because there's something about fans. Fans are fickle. Right? Many of us are Steeler fans, and some of you are right now, and you remember the glory years, and then the years of struggle, and then the resurgence, and then, whatever we have now, who knows what that is. Sisters and brothers, my concern is that our church has the potential to very easily become a church full of fans of Jesus. And Jesus never cared about having fans. He never cared for that. He doesn't want that. If you define a fan as an enthusiastic admirer, fans are not important to Jesus. I think we have a tendency to think that, we can come out together once a week and be fans of Jesus. We can sit in our seats and we can open up our programs and we know how to applaud at just important certain times. And we leave somehow thinking that as fans that it was all done for us. There was a dad who was complaining about church over dinner, and his son said, "Well, Dad, still not a bad show for $1." And we think it's all done for us. We get in the car and we evaluate the sermon. Was it funny? Was it memorable? Was the song selection okay? Did I know the songs? Could I sing them? Was the choir on tune? Did they sing it in the way that was memorable? How was the choir? Were the donuts good after service and before Sunday school? And we go on and on and on, and we forget to keep the main thing the main thing. Some of you have been here a long time. You could recite every pastor for the last 40 years, and you talk about all the different programs that all of those pastors have tried to do, and you can think about, oh, here we go again. When in reality, all those pastors were trying to do was to spur people from being fans to being followers. Over and over again. Because it's so easy to slip back into fandom. Because being a fan often feels pretty good. And because we're these great admirers of Christ, even though he never cared to have fans, if we're really honest with ourselves and if we really search our hearts and we really begin to define our relationship with Jesus, there are 4 questions we need to answer. Here's the first one. Why are you here? Why are you here this morning? Why did you come? For some of you, you come every week. Why do you come every week? If you read the Gospels, Jesus at different points in his ministry, he would draw a line in the sand and he would separate the fans from the followers. One of the things that we saw when we were over in the Holy Land is we saw Cana and Capernaum, and we saw many different places where the miracles actually occurred. And so it was amazing to see those things. Well, one of the places we saw was a place described in John chapter 6. And you can go back and you read that whole chapter on your own. And Jesus was at the height of his ministry, and all kinds of crowds were following Jesus. He was working miracles and he was healing. And in this place, he was providing food from just 5 loaves and 2 fish. And a lot of people in the crowd were following Jesus. And Jesus then realizes what's going on. In John chapter 6, he says this. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. The main reason the crowds were following him at that point were because of the spectacle, because of the show. They wanted to be inspired, not transformed. They said, Jesus, do this again, do this again. And so why are you here? What is your because? Free donuts? Is it because the seats are comfortable? Or is it because you really like the music? Or the worship leader's voice? Or the seats that are so doggone comfortable? Why are you here? What is your because? Is it because your kids make friends here and they all come here? At some point we have to define the relationship and say, why are we here? Jesus pushed the people to do this. After the miracle of feeding the 5,000 in John 6:26, he says, you were looking for me because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Then Jesus said a few verses later on, it says, it's not Moses. Now recognize, Moses was one of their heroes. They were really fans of Moses. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Now remember, Moses was the one who had taken them through the wilderness. Moses was the one who had led them out of Egypt. Moses was the one who was their leader when God had sent quail and bread every day for them to eat. They thought Moses was the cat's meow. This is their top dog. And here Jesus is saying, that's not the true bread. You see, Jesus taught that he was the bread of life. He said, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never get thirsty. When he said that, at this, verse 41, the Jews began to grumble about him because he said, I am the bread that comes down from heaven. But Jesus, even though they grumbled, he doubles down. He says, I am the bread of life in verse 48. Jesus said, your ancestors, they ate this bread in the wilderness and they died. And then he said this, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give for the life of the world. Verse 58, whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. Now here's what I want us to see today. You see, the disciples faced the same question that you and I are facing. Would they be fans following him for the spectacle, for the miracles, or would they follow? Because look what happens in verse 60. On hearing this, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? This is hard. How many of you have read the Bible and read it in God and said, this is hard? Anybody? It's tough. And look what happens in verse 66. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. They said, I can't do this. This is not what I signed up for. Jesus, this is too difficult. This is too hard. This is not all the fun and games. We're coming for the miracles for the show. Just keep doing that. Well, why are you here? Why are you here? What is your because? I'll tell you what Jesus' because is. Jesus' because is that he wants to have a deep relationship with you. That's his because. That's why Jesus is here. Second question is, are you all in? Are you all in? Years ago, I mentioned this already, I noticed that the Pirates, they began to get better, and the number of people coming to the show, increased over and over again. And Jesus wants more. He wants more than us just sitting in the stands. You see, a follower of Jesus will do whatever it takes to follow Jesus. Now, on the whole, we don't do real well when it comes to absolute commitment. When we see people absolutely committed to something in our culture, that breeds in many of us a distrust. We say, well, they're going a little bit too far. Sometimes we view people with absolute commitment with pause, and we say, are they for real? And we hold back from being completely all in on something because we don't want to be labeled as one of those, right? We don't want to be labeled as one of those people. We live in a culture that says everything in moderation, right? And we include our faith in that. A little bit of Jesus, and we're okay. Too much Jesus, well, you've just gone overboard. You see, I think as people, oftentimes we prefer selective commitment. We prefer a selective commitment. Simply put, we customize our Christianity. Have it your way. Take what you like. Leave what you don't. I'm going to follow Jesus, but I'm going to kind of pick and choose those items that I like, those things that make me feel good. I'll follow Jesus, but don't ask me to forgive her. I'd rather hold on to my bitterness than to forgive her. I'll just forget about that part of it. Or don't talk to me about my money. Or, I'll follow Jesus, but don't tell me to abstain from sexual desires. Doesn't Jesus want me to be happy? I'll follow Jesus, but that whole thing about premarital sex, that whole thing about not living together before we're married, let's just cut that page out of the Bible. The part about marriage being between one man and one woman, let's just overlook that, because after all, isn't Jesus all about love? And so we come to the point where we selectively choose what we want to believe in, and we try to get rid of the rest of it. The problem is Jesus never gave us that option. Jesus never said, okay, if you agree with 3 out of 4 things, then you're okay. I'll be honest with you, there are parts of the Bible that really bother me. Anybody with me? But I don't have the right to cut those out. Just because they're hard for me to live up to does not mean that I can ignore them. Surely Jesus didn't expect us to love our enemies. Surely Jesus wouldn't want us to love the Russians. It was interesting. In one of our hotels, there were a whole bunch of Ukrainians who were not able to get back home because of the war. And so we had some meals and stuff around them. And then we went to Egypt, and we went to this one museum, and the security at the museum was all upset because there was this bus of Americans, and then there were 3 buses of Russians, and they thought that the war was going to break out between our bus of Americans and the 3 buses of Russians. And so they tried to keep us separate. You see, Jesus said, love your enemies. He didn't say it was easy, but he told us to do it. You see, sometimes I think we have this idea that we will follow Jesus, but only in those areas where we are comfortable. I'll only read the parts of the Bible that make me feel good. I'll only read those verses that encourage me. But where it calls me to change my behavior, change my attitude, well, I'll just flip over that page and get on to the next. See, sometimes if that's our attitude, then we're not a follower of Jesus. We're just fans. You may have season tickets. The pew may be broken into your bottom because you have sat there for so long. But you still could be just a fan. Will you take the next step? You see, as we come to Jesus, there is no bargaining, there is no bartering, there is no finagling. There really are only 2 choices. Take it or leave it. There is no customizable Christianity. There's only one, and that's being a follower of Jesus. Now, that doesn't sit well with us who live in a culture that say we want what we want, and we want it when we want it, and we want it in the way that we want it. You see, you and I don't make the rules for this. Jesus does. Why are you here? Are you all in? Thirdly, have you made it your own? Have you made your faith your own? See, many of us started going to church because of a parent. I went to church because my parents went to church. There were times that I didn't want to go to church, and my parents said, you know, Chris, if you're going to be out half the night Saturday night, you're going to be in church on Sunday morning. Anybody else have parents like that? Yeah. And so sometimes when people say, I'm not going to force my kids to go to church, somebody had to force your kids to go to school. Now, I know I just went from preaching to meddling. But see, this part about being a Christian, it's not halfway. We're in or we're out. Some of us started coming because of boyfriend or girlfriend. I went to camp in the summer because I wanted to meet girls. I didn't go to get closer to Jesus, and praise God I found Carla. But that's a whole other story, okay? But yeah, we come sometimes because of other people. But it's easy to kind of get along with the gang. I used to ride back and forth to seminary with a guy who loved Southern gospel music. I didn't like Southern gospel music, but guess what? It was his car, and so he played the music, and so, you know, I kind of put up with it. And I kind of got to know where, you know, I didn't hate it, but it just wasn't my thing. I haven't listened to it since. But when I was with him in his car, I kind of got to know some of the songs and stuff like that. And sometimes people come to church and they kind of get that way. They get to where they learn the songs, they know what to say, they know when to stand up, on and on. And eventually the songs may even grow on us a little bit. But you see, if we're coming just to appease someone, if we're just coming because mom or dad got us to come, then we're missing it. You see, we can't go to heaven on somebody else's faith. My concern is that sometimes you and I can become numb to real faith. We can become comfortable with how we are worshiping and not really understand. You know, in this season of vaccines, everybody talks about vaccines. Vaccines are designed to inoculate us from the real thing. And sometimes some of the vaccines, they give you just a little bit of the disease so that your body will develop the antibodies to be able to fight it off when it comes, right? My concern is that sometimes we have just enough religion to inoculate us from the real thing. Luke 14:26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, this verse is not about hating your family. There's so many other places Jesus calls us to love our families and helps us to grow our families. This is a verse about priorities. And Jesus is saying that our faith must be more important than anything else to us. That our relationship with Jesus must supersede even our relationship with those that we love the most. That our love for Jesus has to exceed our love for our husband, our love for our wife, our love for our children, closer than any other relationship we have or can't imagine. So in these next weeks, I want us to begin to search our hearts about the fourth question for today. Are you a follower of Jesus, or are you just a fan? Lord God, we are so grateful to you for your incredible gift to us. And Jesus, this is the question for us. And we recognize that it's easy for us to fall back into fandom and to just fall back into routine and habit. And God, I pray that this Lenten season, that you would challenge us, that you would make us uncomfortable, that you would call us to take our next step to be those who are following, who are being transformed, and to those who are serving with you. In your holy name we pray. Amen.